we have heard there is a proposal to redesignate the river as a national park and preserve. They had a website or two with the tagline, Future of the Buffalo River, that hit a little bit. We consider the land and we consider the river like an ancestor. I feel a great responsibility.
Let's go all the way back to like when your family first came to this area. What is the history of your family, and how did your family make it here, and how have they persisted and stayed here for so many years?
Well, in 1837, Abraham Valines and his caravan of wagons arrived on the Buffalo River. There was a spot that's close to where Granny Henderson's home is now, and I call her Granny Henderson. If I'm talking to my community, it's Ev. We don't typically refer to her as Granny Henderson. Yeah. That's kind of a folklore deal, and it's a thing of respect. That's kind of a title that we give as respect. But they started a camp and built a log cabin there near where Hemden Hollow is, and where Big Bluff is at, and across from Big Bluff actually, and in that area, they built the first cabin, and there is this cabin that still stands there today. It's not the same cabin, but it's on the same location. So if you're up on Big Bluff and you look down, that little cabin that you can see in that grove of beechwood trees, that is our original home site for our family. And so as they, as generations went on, they just always farmed that land. My great-grandfather was the last person to farm those fields that are to the left of Big Bluff. And on some of the old Park Service maps, you'll see Coy fields, and his name was Coy Valines. And so, Low Gap, Coy fields, we do everything very... we're very pragmatic. We don't embellish things too much.
No fancy names out here.
Yeah, it's just, but we've always been on the river. And then when Mr. Yarbrough came, he bought a lot of the land. That was the horse ranch. There was an Arabian horse ranch at Steel Creek, and my great-grandfather and my grandfather worked there. And, I've been able to visit with people within my oral history studies with the Remnants Project who have been able to give me stories of my own great-grandparents who rode a wagon from up here where they lived on Steel Creek down the river every morning at 4 o'clock. And she passed, the lady that gave me that information, she passed away last year. But she gave me more information about my own family that I never expected to hear. It was and she was a distant relative, but it was something that I wasn't expecting, but it was one of the greatest gifts that I've ever received. I know a lot about our family history, but to have it from somebody else's perspective and them tell me stories and little anecdotes about how things were, and my great-grandmother getting up at 4 o'clock every morning, and I think Dean's exact word was, Viola would get up every morning at 4 o'clock and cook a big breakfast and fix a big lunch, while Boyd and Coy went out and loafed and fished and spent the whole day on the creek doing whatever they were doing, and she worked the fields.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so, it was...
While the boys were goofing off,
while the boys were hunting and fishing,
yeah.
She was actually tending to the crops, which, when you get out here and you start looking around, it would be real tempting to go hunting and fishing instead of working.
Every day.
But our family just always stayed. So my great-grandfather, Coy, he lived... it's less than a quarter of a mile by road, probably 500, 800 yards as the crow flies. So I can say when I look out my bedroom window that I can see where my great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my mother, where they all lived within one small area. And, we consider the land and we consider the river like an ancestor. It's as much a member of our family as our literal human members of our family.
Wow.
Or I shouldn't say we. I consider it that way. I feel a great responsibility to the land, and especially to this land, because it's now my turn to be caretaker. My parents have kind of turned things over to me to manage, and that's a lot of pressure when you're this many generations in.
Yeah.
Not only is, living on one place for that many generations incredibly rare in kind of the modern landscape of how families function and how they think, and even just really the kind of the modern ethos on work and moving and families moving off and all of that. But I was thinking as you were telling the story of the lady, and I'd forgotten her name, who shared about your Dean, who shared about your grandparents and great grandparents, and was thinking about how if living on one place for that many generations is rare, it may be even more rare to interact with people who are distant relatives or even just a part of the community who know your family history and some of those stories as well or even better than you do, because they had that angle on it.
Right. And that's
incredible. That's
one thing within the Remnants Project that the only reason it works is because I'm the one, not that I shouldn't make it sound like because I'm the one doing it, but because I'm local and because they know me and they're related to me and they trust me to not turn it into something that feels exploited or hillbilly or, a lot of the more negative styled connotations that we tend to get. And people trust me, and they, there's a lot expected of me doing that. And I take it very seriously when I go into somebody's home and talk to them and ask them to tell me their stories of growing up, because around here, our history is so important, and those stories are well guarded. And there's still some people that I know very well who'll say, "No, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to talk yet."
Really?
And they've
why is that?
They've not got bodies buried anywhere. I don't know. They just, or I don't think they do. But it's just a thing of, I think, in their own time and to not feel pressured. And, I can go one town over if you're going down to around Sand Gap. And I know the guy that runs the store there. And I asked him, I was like, "Hey, could you check in with your community and see if there's anybody who feels comfortable sitting down and talking?" And he was like, "No, my people aren't going to talk to you, because I'm not that far removed by distance, but because of the style of, I think it's probably a throwback to our Appalachia roots, just how we're geared. We don't give information, whether it's mundane or otherwise, to strangers.
Right.
It's just something that's not, it's just not done."
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, even within the Ozarks, you have these pockets in these kind of tucked away hills and hollers, and there's communities that have roots that go way back, and there's stories. And even to be one community over, you may not be as forthcoming because I don't know you. I don't know who your dad was.
And I don't know who your kin is.
Yeah.
I might say something about your great Aunt Matilda that was, horrible and really offensive. And so people are fairly guarded. And another thing about the area, there were so many people that stayed here. This area, I can't throw a rock and not hit a cousin. I have this little joke when I'm giving a presentation, and I say, I'm the 7th generation of my family to live here, and I'm not the only one that can say that. Well, they're all my cousins, the other people that can say that, but and that's how it is.
Yeah.
But the Valines family and the Clark family, there's several families that were established here back in the 1800s. And I shouldn't start naming them off because I'll start forgetting them and I'll get in trouble. But those families made lasting homesteads, and their offspring never wanted to leave. I mean, there were a few stragglers here and there that would move off, and I think all of Newton County went to Kansas City at one point to make their fortune, but they came back.
Yeah. How have people? I'm curious. Up until what point did people kind of stay in that economic environment where they could live off the land? Farming was enough to pay the bills. At what point did it change, if it has changed, to where, like, farming's no longer enough to cut it with just the way that the world is today?
I would say late 80s, early 90s, maybe actually probably 90s, mid 90s, was when I noticed it more within my area. It seemed like more people started getting jobs in town, and that was just kind of what we would say. It was somebody went to town and got a job instead of working on the farm.
Yeah.
And people knew how to do everything on their own, and that's something that we still do. My dad is a carpenter and a plumber and an electrician. Richard is a mechanic, and my husband, and he can do electrical and plumbing, and so there's a lot of, you take care of yourself, but you also help take care of your neighbors. So if there's a neighbor who has moved in, or if there's a neighbor that's older that doesn't know how to do these things, you do it for them and you help them, or you show them how to do it till they can figure it out.
Right.
But there's a lot of tending to folks. It's very much a hands-on community.
You mentioned it, 80s, 90s. Did the designation of the National River in 72, do you think that played into some of that, like kind of, I hate to say pushing people out, but really when you had people getting their land taken from them at the time, was that part of like the slow process towards that point where people couldn't live off the land and farm?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people lost their larger acreage. And if you look around here, you can see there's very little usable land as far as row cropping. Row cropping is not a thing here.
Yeah.
There's just not enough flat land to do it. Our cows, we buy cows that do better in brush and in woods than they do on pasture. And when people lost those big river bottoms to do their hay and their crops, people did crops on the river. And I've got aerial photos that show what it looked like in 42 and in 54 of the huge swaths of fields. And so it absolutely had an impact on what they could raise. A lot of them were displaced and moved to town. Some of them moved as close as they could get to their original home site. Or I know in one particular case, they just moved across the road. So the park took everything on this side of the road, and they were like, okay, well, we're just going to move across the road. And then later on, the park came back and was like, well, we want that too.
Oh, really?
And they were like, oh, no, I moved across the road.
Yeah, I already moved once.
Right. And so in full disclosure, my dad worked for the park. He got a job when I was in around first grade. So there's not, I don't have a vendetta or anything or any kind of hard feelings. I think that there was a terrible methods used in the displacement of the people that lived here. And I think even the park would agree to that. And I know that a lot of the groups that help support the park, they would agree that the methods were atrocious in how people were displaced. And that is a very lingering, bitter taste in people's mouth. And I think that correlation to the survey and the things that were coming out that had spurred the town hall meeting, I think those kind of things were what caused everybody to have such a reaction.
Yeah.
So you'd mentioned the community, the family feel, the multi-generations, even stemming back to the few families that came and settled. And then you'd said the river even feels like part of the ancestry. It's an ancestor. Before we ask the question, what was the town hall meeting like? Where'd we go there? Do you mind setting up for those who may be listening who don't know what's going on with the designation and the re-designation?
Sure.
Just kind of a short history of when was the river designated a national river, and then very recently, where's the tension in trying to make it more or less, or however
Sure.
you want to decide where that lands?
Yeah.
Well, I've never known the Buffalo to be anything other than the Buffalo National River. It was created in 1972. I was born in 76. So I don't have a memory of what it was like before. A lot of people do. But in 72, the National Park Service created the Buffalo National River. And I think the total acreage is somewhere around 94,000 acres, and it spans several counties. It's not just Newton. It's Newton, Searcy, Marion, Baxter, and I think there may be one more. Though I know the watershed encompasses a lot. And so for the last 50 years, we have lived under the same rules and regulations of the national park. It's not always been easy for some locals. Some still have, some old issues about how things were done in the 70s.
Some lingering hurt feelings.
Yeah, some lingering hurt and a lot of pain. And, people will say sometimes, well, so-and-so needs to quit worrying about their grandpappy's land getting taken. You have to understand that that's all these people had. They didn't have anything. They didn't have fancy vehicles. A lot of them didn't even have a vehicle. It's such a remote and isolated area. It's not like we were up to the same standards as Harrison, Fayetteville, Little Rock, the towns that are close by. We were living decades behind, and we don't see that, or I don't see that as a bad thing. Of course, I like to keep the old ways. I still make maple syrup in my great granny's, iron kettle, and
You gave us some muscadine jelly as we walked in here, which we thank you for. I can't wait to try that.
Yeah, well, the muscadine jelly was made in my great granny's canner. So, we try to honor the old ways as much as we can, and I think that the things that are coming up now, they're talking about wanting to redesignate the river. And I'll try to just give you the facts and not put my editorialize in it.
We can editorialize here in a bit.
And to be clear, you don't speak for everyone, right? This is your own personal opinion.
Yeah, this is me. I'm not speaking for the Remnants Project. I'm not speaking for the cabins. I'm just a local who called a meeting. And there's a proposal. We don't have a plan, but we have heard there is a proposal to redesignate the river as a national park and preserve. And the park aspect of this new combo park would be that there would be no hunting and fishing. The preserve aspect of it would allow hunting and fishing, but we already have hunting and fishing.
Right.
One of the things that I have noticed about this that was made aware to me was the fact that we have historical allowances for certain types of hunting and fishing that are very specific. There's only 2 properties within the National Park Service properties nationwide that have gigging as a protected way to take fish. So hunting certain animals by dog, gigging, those were historical methods of taking animals, and those were written into the legislation for the Buffalo National River.
Really? So those have been grandfathered in because of the tradition here.
Right. And that's not typical. There are other parks.
Interesting.
There may be hunting and fishing in other parks, but those specific specific methods are not approved.
Okay.
So the hunting and fishing in other parks may be, as states regulate and change rules and whatever,
Sure.
whatever they decide, it's allowed.
Right.
The Buffalo National River is saying there's actually specific legislation that is
Yes.
allowed as it covers hunting and fishing.
That's cool. I didn't know.
That's really cool.
Yeah. And I'd had a former resource officer from the national park was the one who had given me that information. He actually spoke at the town hall meeting, and he let me know that, once that book is opened and we are starting to write new legislation for a new park, those type of historical hunting and fishing methods that are not as prevalent or common will probably, in his opinion, they would not be included.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which I could see that, because anytime if traditions and things have changed to the point where less and less people do that because it's less prevalent in other areas and just in general, that method has gone away. You have less people advocating for that, asking for that. So I could see how something like that might get kind of wiped away.
Right. Horseback riding is another activity on the park that is a little bit nervous. I've talked to several horseback riders worried about access to trails, things like that. my dad, when he worked for the Park Service, there was a rule in the wilderness area of the park that nothing with a wheel could be on the trails. So if they had a tree down or different things, they had to carry in, carry out. They couldn't bring a wheelbarrow
They're
or
not coming in on side by
yeah,
side.
or even a wheelbarrow or a little trailer at certain points.
A little wagon.
Yeah, at that
A
when he
radio
worked
flyer
there.
wagon.
Yeah, when he worked there, that wasn't an option.
Wow.
So there are some real stickler restrictions in wilderness areas. My opinion on the preserve aspect is I haven't seen anything that they're offering me that we don't already have.
Mm-hmm.
And when somebody is trying to sell me something that that I already have, I get a little, I pay attention because we can already hunt and fish, and we can do certain types of hunting and fishing that you can't do anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like it feels in that regard as it relates to hunting and fishing, which is very much something that we're passionate about. It's like it feels like we're creating a fix for a problem we don't have. Like we're creating the problem
Right.
and a solution for this problem that doesn't really quite exist, or it hasn't been explained to like why is this something that we currently like need to protect. It doesn't feel like it's at risk.
Right. And when I spoke with people on the ground at New River Gorge, which is the model that we're being looked at, that's our model.
And that's the one in West Virginia?
Yes, it's in West Virginia. And they switched. They were the nation's second national river. I think they were created in 1978, and the difference there is they weren't taken by eminent domain. There was no land taken by eminent domain to form that. And I was doing a research project on the displacement of folks here, and one of the things I knew that New River Gorge was the second national river, and part of that project was I'd said, well, they learned their lesson on buffalo, and they knew not to, attempt it in that manner just because it was such an ugly battle.
Yeah.
But the preserve aspect or the park aspect of no hunting has been a real contentious issue in New River Gorge.
Yeah.
So anywhere that there's a national park, there's no hunting allowed in that. And apparently their land there, because it's in a gorge, is very hard to access and very steep. And so hunting, I think where the restrictions were placed on hunting was areas that was highly used for hunting, and that created a problem.
Yeah.
And it is 10% park and 90% preserve.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but initially in that conversation, because I was doing some research on it, it was basically said that we're not going to take anything away from hunting rights. But then it was almost like a bait and switch where it was like, well, but except for this 10%, like you still get 90%, but like this 10%, we are going to hold back for the park. And so I feel like there were some hurt feelings over that of like, well, you totally bait and switched me.
Right. And I think that was an issue. I knew when I started researching this before the town hall, and I was trying to reach out to people in New River Gorge, I wanted to hear as much feedback as possible for whichever direction, because that was going to kind of help my decision making, because it's not really comparing apples to apples, but it's kind of close. And the hunters were really upset. And I know the community here. And if there's 1 inch, 1 centimeter taken with no hunting restriction, that's not going to go well. Mm-hmm. And I believe that is, I'll start with my conspiracy theory now.
Here we go. We're diving in.
I feel like that is part of the push for it to be a preserve. In all the talks that I had with Runway and different people regarding this, there was always the emphasis on the preserve aspect. And in my opinion, it is because it is open to state management and maintenance. Mm-hmm. And my concern with that is if we've had a hard time the last 50 years being governed by the federal government with the same set of rules, how are we going to be governed every 4 years with a potential new governor with a new idea and a new plan or pet project for the river? That concerns me, a lot.
Yeah.
I think stability in this area and community is something that people have taken for granted, and they need to remember that it is that we are people that live here, and we deserve to have our voices heard and to have our opinions listened to, because at the end of the day, people that visit here go home and we're the ones that are left. I think with New River Gorge, the other thing that was concerning to me is that I'd spoken with a concessionaire who said that not one parking lot has been paved, not one road has been maintained. The only thing they've done with the money that they got that was additional funding, which came very late and was paltry and compared to what they were expecting at first, was to buy more land to increase the size of the park.
Interesting.
And when we visited with the National Park Service, their statement was that a different designation does not increase funding. It is not a guarantee of additional funding at all. And
So the idea that doing this would open up new funding isn't necessary. It's not a guarantee.
it's not.
It is a possibility, but it's not something that we've seen to be always true.
I don't even know if it's a possibility within the National Park Service, unless there is a private company that is saying we're going to do the infrastructure and we're going to do all of this work. I don't know where the money's going to come from, because national parks are always underfunded.
Which that is a very real possibility.
It
knowing who operates, who operates within our state and who has one of the largest or the biggest outdoor retailer right outside of our state. You could see a world pretty quickly in which there is a redesignation and then all of a sudden there is private funding that is on, behalf of the river and tourism, whatever else, but also very much to their own interest.
Right. And I've said that that it probably won't be long till we start seeing Buffalo River bottled water at Sam's. Different little things. A coffee shop down at Hemden Hollow, and across the road or across the creek there at Gray Rock, we can have a granola stand, and and a craft brewery at Kyle's. It's at the cost of, for me, it's at the cost of the people who were displaced. I feel like it's a slap in the face to the people who were removed, to be told, well, you're not taking good enough care of this land, and you might start renting it, or you might build a hotel on it, or you might profit from this in some way, and we don't feel like that ought to happen, and so we're going to create a park and we're going to restrict that, and it's not going to be commercial. It's going to be wild. It's going to be something that everybody can enjoy, and it's a national park. It's not just for Arkansans. It's not just for us locals. It is for everybody, and we don't mind sharing. We just don't want to see our way of life completely upended and changed in the process.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's go then to, I think, Kyle, great question, setting up like what is happening. From there, what was the timeline of events like? What did you hear? What were the first kind of rumors swirling? And then how did that ultimately lead to you saying, we need a meeting on this?
Well, we had a neighbor that sold a large parcel of land up on Shiloh to the Walton family. And I'm not sure what member or what LLC, but we knew that was there. And then the survey started, and there were rumors, and Johnny Morris is at Dog Patch, and things just started picking up. And so I had contacted a JP and said, do you think we ought to have a meeting to try to get information to people's hands? And he was like, yeah, we need to do that. And after about a week or so, it didn't materialize, and the Madison County Record dropped their story. I think that was the 4th of October.
Right. Were they the first story to kind of break?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that Ellen was the one that broke that, and kind of let everybody know what was going on. And we were in Hot Springs. We were at the Hot Springs Film Festival with our documentary that was showing there. And, I was trying to be present in the documentary, film festival, but I was also, checking my phone, and people were messaging me, hey, what's going on? This is unusual. And so when I got back, I started getting phone calls at home. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to send an email. So I got on the computer and sent Runway an email and said, hey, we are having a town hall. Do you guys care to participate and give us some information on your survey and different aspects of what's going on around the Buffalo River?
And Runway is, I don't know if we've explained it yet, but Runway is the private investment firm that the Waltons own, right?
Yes, it's Runway Group LLC, and it's out of Bentonville, I believe. And so they had a website or two up with the tagline or the call sign. I don't know exactly. Maybe it's the address. Future of the Buffalo River, which was a little bit of, it was that hit a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, but anyway, I sent him a message and said, hey, we would love to have you to come. We're going to have a town hall, and we would like for you guys to provide us, some answers. And got an email back, and they said, sure, we would love to have a conversation. And so I called the JP, and I said, okay, we're having a town hall. And Runway Group is coming. And so I thought, well, we've got to have, more people. And so we booked the Carroll Electric building in Jasper, which is where, a lot of groups get together for meetings and such. And then I started noticing as we started inviting people, the number, and then it just grew legs and ran off because it was like it just took a life of its own.
How many people were you expecting?
I'll be honest. When the day that Runway called to say they weren't going to join, at that point, it was around 400 because their spokesman and I had a conversation, and he said, man, do you think there's going to be this many? There's a lot of people that are looking like they're going to show up.
Was
and
this on Facebook? People could say like, I'm coming.
Going or interested or that little ticker. And I said, well, the thing with a Facebook deal is so many people will commit and then they'll never show.
Interested means
means
I'll
nothing.
keep up with it maybe.
Right. Or I'll see what happens the next day. And so I was still thinking, we can still do Carroll Electric.
Yeah.
And then the next day, I think it jumped to like 600 or 700. And I called Carroll Electric, and I was like, I don't think this is going to work. And I called the school, and they checked their books, and they said, yeah, we're clear. You've got it. And then they called me that afternoon after I had changed the venue and said, we're having a junior basketball tournament the same night.
Like junior high, like
yes. And
seventh
it's a tournament. So it's schools from all over. And I was like, well, I can't switch venues again. That's just going to look too fickle. And
you'd already put the word out. We're moved.
Yeah. And I was like, no, we're sure we're good. And they were like, yeah, but it had missed, because it was a tournament, it had missed somebody's calendar. And so I asked them, I said, if we have enough law enforcement there, are you comfortable with us having both? Because it's in separate areas of the school. And they were, and I checked with law enforcement because there were going to be kids there, and it was just a big group. And I wasn't really expecting like there to be trouble or
like a riot,
or anybody packing or anything like that. Because that's just not. I mean, our community's upset, but they're not ready to. They weren't ready to.
They're not going to war.
They're not ready to burn the place down yet or anything. And the night of when I got there at the venue, there were 400 seats out. And half of the building was empty. And I looked at the superintendent and I was like, I need more chairs. And she said, we don't have any more. And the kids, she announced on the PA system, and the kids went in each and every classroom and pulled every chair out of the rooms.
That's so great.
Yeah, and brought them. And so we had 673 chairs. And when I told Miss Brazel, or Dr. Brazel, the superintendent, I said, she said, how many people are you thinking? And I was like, 900 probably. And she was like, there's no way, and then we ended up with almost 12.
My goodness.
That we counted.
Yeah.
There were people outside that didn't get in. And I was really grateful to have the Zoom option because with COVID and different illnesses that were going, that way people could still be informed and not have to be there in person. And the Facebook Live, we were afraid that we would max out our Zoom capacity because that was through the public library. And sure enough, we did. And that was why they streamed it through their Facebook page, was to make sure people had access.
Man. So you're seeing this kind of snowball. It's piling up. You mentioned runway group at some point they called and they're saying, actually, we're not going to come.
Yeah.
What was that conversation like?
I had a meeting set up. It was after they had seen a larger number. They were going to send somebody else. And I was like, oh, they're sending somebody else. I
Don't
know
send the intern.
Right. I know the guy that I've been talking to. And so I was supposed to meet with one of the vice presidents of one particular area. And I got a message right before our phone meeting, and it was going to have to postpone. And then a little bit later, they called and said, "No, actually, we're backing out. We're not gonna be there." And I wanted to have a well-rounded panel. That was my point, and the reason we were having the meeting was specifically to ask Runway those questions because they were the only one that we knew to ask at that point. And as I did the research trying to prepare for the meeting, then, we learned that there were other players involved, Brian Sanders, and there's a local business here who has been contacting other local businesses, pitching them the idea of the re-designation. I contacted him, and he didn't want to, or he said that he didn't really have any involvement in it. And no, he was going to be out of town and couldn't make it and didn't think that he had any information really worth sharing. So we had a very lopsided panel. And then I started trying to think of, communities and groups, organizations that already support the buffalo. And I wanted to get their take on it. The Watershed Alliance. The fact that, and this will be the one spot where I probably tear up, to have the Watershed Alliance, Farm Bureau, the Audubon Society, to have those groups on the same stage after things in the past that we're trying to move forward, through as a community. To have those people sit on the same panel and to represent their individual group to a community who is fairly polarized with some of those groups, to see that come together, that was the highlight of the whole event. That was the only thing that mattered to me at that point, because it just showed that when push comes to shove, no matter our political preference, our religious preference, our stance on past issues within the park or around the park, whether it's farming, environmentalism, whatever the problem was, they still came together. And that was the unifying object that night, was the community coming together for the river.
Yeah.
And that meant more to me than however this goes. That just let me know what community that I live in.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, hearing you say that gives me chills, and I echo that same sentiment. I remember seeing a picture on the news, talking to my wife about it, like, how beautiful is this that we live in a place like Arkansas, the Ozarks, the people in this community, that we will put aside our political difference, especially in today's day and age where it's like so black and white.
Yeah.
It's so polarized. I can't even hear you because I disagree with you. But the fact that so many different people from all different walks of life would put that aside and come together to unite around this one place, same thing. It put tears in my eyes just talking about it and just understanding, like, we still have something here that brings people together that is worth protecting and worth valuing, and clearly that showed with the amount of people that came to the town hall.
It did. I mean, I can't express enough how incredibly proud that I was to see everybody there. There was not one push. There was not one shove. There was not one voice raised. There was not an argument in the crowd. And these people were packed in there like sardines. And it was about an hour and a half total. There were people that were sitting in the floor in the front. Some people brought their own chairs. They were ready to tailgate and they showed up. But I think seeing that should let people know how important this is. And it's not just the generational locals like myself. It's the blow-ins. It's the back to the landers that have become part of our communities and that we now consider locals. It is it's a very unique community. And I was really, really proud.
Yeah. Who were you trying to invite? Like, who
Yep.
all did you invite to be on the panel, and then who ended up coming?
We reached out to Brian Sanders' office, the governor's office, Johnny Morris's office, Austin Albers at Buffalo Outdoor Center. I'm trying to think. I can't remember the photo of that of the empty chair. There may have been one or two others, but they all.
Was there a senator that was invited?
Senator King was there. He spoke.
What about Westerman?
Westerman did not. Now, this was when there was all the kerfuffle going on in D.C. about the speaker.
Okay.
And so I think that the Washington delegates or the Washington senators and Congress, and I think they were all there.
Gotcha.
And so I think that hampered a little bit. But a lot of them sent representatives.
Okay.
So even though they weren't there in person, they did have a representative there.
Okay.
Our moderator was the Jasper mayor, Mike Thomas. Then we had the breakdown of the fact sheet and the survey by Wendy Finn. I did a small presentation on the effects of past increased tourism. Jack Stewart represented the Audubon Society. Billy Bell was a Newton County resident. Jack Bowles, the president of the Newton County Farm Bureau. Gordon Watkins, who's the president of the Buffalo River Watershed Alliance. Arkansas State Senator Brian King, he made a speech on the impact of potential redesignation. Jared Phillips, who is a writer, historian, and farmer. Brinkley Cook Campbell is an attorney, and he wrote an open letter to our legislative members and to the governor for people to sign if they wanted to do so afterwards. And he read the letter that he had prepared. If you haven't seen a copy of that, I need to get you one because it's a good one. When he sent me his rough draft, because I was, trying to make sure everybody we were all doing good, and he sent me his rough draft, and when I read it to my husband, I cried. I just bawled. I think his rough draft was the best one he had, but he did I think, and I don't know if I shouldn't say it that way, but he did do some edits on it to make it a little bit nicer or softer, maybe. And
pulled it back in, reined it back in a
rein
little.
it in just a little, so as not to be divisive.
Sure.
We want to be upfront about our feelings on it, but not go too far.
Sure.
I felt like the presence of the crowd, and the one thing that I did say just before, I don't remember exactly what time it was not long before I was leaving to go to the venue, I got a phone call from Runway Group, and they had, to wish us well and to say, hope everything goes good tonight. But they also repeated a few things that they wanted me to convey to the crowd, to let people know. And I just didn't think that was appropriate coming from me. The whole point of having the town hall was for them to convey their own message. And I didn't feel like the errand girl that night.
Sure. Yeah.
I think that's totally appropriate.
So,
what were some of the moments from the speakers that, in your opinion, if you had to just pick a few, and I know they were probably all very good, but some of the high points where you felt like the crowd really resonated with, or standing applause, or anything where it was like, this really hit home with people?
I know the one thing that everybody's was wonderful. The fact that Farm Bureau took a stand was really great. The Watershed Alliance too. Just the fact that people were willing to take a stance was a big deal at that point, because people didn't have a lot of information, and so we were giving people information, giving them the facts that we had, and then letting them base what their response was going to be, and we didn't know which way it was going to go. But one thing Gordon Watkins said was, he had heard this, that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And that really resonated, I think, with a lot of people. Billy Bell's speech of rich men not from here was a very powerful speech. I think for some people, they may have thought it was a little strong, but I think there were a lot of people that didn't think it was strong enough. And he gave just a very clear and concise opinion of what he felt what was going on and what had went on before, that people come here to try to change our landscape when they know nothing about us so often.
And he's just the Newton County resident, right?
Yeah, he. When I asked for people's bios, his was the shortest. Brinkley had the shortest one because his was, I think, just like attorney at law, born and raised at Mount Judy, and attorney at law. And then Billy came back with Newton County resident, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna run out of ink in the computer on the printer on this one. But he was law enforcement for the National Park Service for 13 years. He was also law enforcement for the National Forest Service for 7. So he has combined 20-year experience as a resource officer for Department of Interior, and I guess it would probably be the Department of Agriculture.
Gotcha. What was the statement or some of the things that basically Runway had asked you to kind of say?
It boiled down to, we didn't mean to cause such a mess.
Okay.
We didn't mean to upset people.
Yeah.
But I still don't think, in all the conversations that I had with them and with different members of their team, I still don't think they understood what they had done or why there was so much offense taken.
Yeah.
I think that they did a very poor job researching their demographic. And I felt like that when I was conveying to them issues of generational trauma in this area, that it was just not heard.
Mm-hmm.
And I may be wrong. I don't know what they took away from it because, they didn't tell me. But I didn't feel like that it was something that was of importance. Maybe.
Yeah. What do you think was like the reason why so many people came together at that moment? And, beyond just like the idea itself, we had mentioned, and I know kind of before we started recording, it wasn't so much that like this thing is inherently bad or nobody's for it or nobody wants to hear it. It was more so how things were dealt with. Can you maybe go into a little bit of detail there of like, why were people so upset?
They were afraid. It's fear.
Mm-hmm.
And fear is a very catalyzing emotion. I had a little boy he was probably 7th grade because he was in the high school and he was helping carry the chairs out into the venue. I'd mentioned they brought out extra chairs, and he walked up to me and he said, "Hey, lady." And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Thanks for what it is you're doing because we don't want to lose our house." And there were rumors that the entire watershed was going to be evicted. There were people who were afraid that they were going to be removed from their homes. And because nobody had stepped up and said, "Hey, we're not going to be doing that," or "This is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it," people's fear ran away with itself. Mm-hmm. And we've been displaced once, so why couldn't it happen? There's already a precedence. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to think that history can't repeat itself because we see it time and time again.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess I would be remiss without saying, they have since said, Runway has said, we don't support any eminent domain. Like there's been things that they've said to where like, well, a preserve, one thing that was mentioned is a preserve opens things up to mining potential, right? Mm-hmm. Not just hunting, but they've come out and said, well, we have no intention of doing that, right? There's eminent domain. We have no intention of taking away land. So they have come out and said some of these things and saying that is not what we're trying to do. And if you say, well, if intentions are pure, and that's what we would like to think and hope to think, that is not what they're trying to do, essentially.
Right. My thing on that was when I spoke to Runway, I believe the first or second time, I was told that they valued what the community thought above anything else. That if they didn't have community involvement, it was kind of like Westerman's statement of, if the community's not behind this, I'm not going to be behind this. Now, they didn't say they weren't going to be behind it, but they said they really wanted and valued community support. And I said, so if you don't get that, are you prepared to just drop this? Mm. And, I either got a no answer or, some fluff.
Something not clear.
And on the aspect of eminent domain, I had this conversation with them during that same line of conversation, which was, we're not afraid of being taken by eminent domain. We're afraid of being taxed out of our homes. And that is a very real issue here. Gentrification is not just for cities. That's something that I think is a real misconception. And there are people right now for the last 3 years that our children here, they cannot live here. They cannot afford property here. They can't build a home. They can't buy 5 acres to move a trailer on. There is nothing available. We had some rough ground come up for sale near us, and we were like, we wanted to buy it because it would have given us highway access, and it went for $15,000 an acre for unusable ground, for primarily unusable ground.
Just because it's in this area.
Yeah. And what's that going to do to property taxes?
Right.
You know, if people are paying $15,000 for unusable ground, you know, there's going to come a time really shortly that we can't pay our taxes. And then what happens? Well, you get gobbled up by your more wealthy neighbors. And that's something that I feel like that people, you know, are not looking at that longer game of taxation.
Yeah, which has a very real impact. A lot of people, you know, nobody likes to think about taxes, talk about taxes, but it very much impacts people.
Right.
What was the outcome since the meeting? What has kind of happened, and where are we at today?
Well, because this is not like my profession. I always say, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing it. I think right now we're going to be setting up a 501c4. That's a nonprofit organization. It's called Alliance for the Buffalo National River. It will be something in place so that if this gets past us and makes it into legislation, we at least have the opportunity to have an input on it. That's like our last ditch effort. We really hope that this will not fall on deaf ears, that our voices will be heard, and it understood that we're not saying that we don't want progress. It's just it has to be at a sustainable rate, and it has to have community involvement. You know, I don't want to see the road you guys came in on tonight as windy and curvy as it was.
We did get a little lost because we lost service, and then my Google Maps recalculated. And we're like, crap, we're like 2 minutes away and we can't find it.
And you know, I don't want to see that turn into a 4-way. I don't want to have 4 lanes of traffic. I don't want to see a lot of overdevelopment. I don't want to see a big cedar lodge on the bank of the river. And we call the river the creek. So I don't want to see that on the creek. I don't. When I'm floating on the Buffalo, I want to see, you know, the turtles and the snakes and the deer and the elk, and I don't want to be having to look at an ugly building or a billboard or a shop or you know. I think we need to start valuing the things that we have erased. We've erased nature from so many areas, and people flock here because it is the way that it is.
Right.
So I think I mentioned earlier, you know, why would you go buy a new truck just because the oil needs changing? You know, there are things that we can do. We can support our nonprofits that are already helping the river. There are so many. Buffalo River Partners is a great organization. They are working on stabilizing Ev Henderson's house right now. They're working on lots of other projects within the park. I feel like we could start inside. I don't think we have to, you know, break the mold and start all fresh.
Yeah. To that point, so since the meeting, Runway has they've paused. They said there are no new steps, there are no next steps. But to your version, what you said was something along the lines of, it's not that we don't want progress. It's just that maybe we have a slightly different idea of what progress looks like. What in your mind is some of the things that like are actual issues here in this region that need to be addressed, or going forward, like, you know, we need to have a plan, because if tourism is going to increase and, you know, more and more people move to Arkansas and Northwest Arkansas every day, so the numbers will go up. And I think we all know that, right? Yeah. What are some of the things that we need to start thinking about, and what would be your idea or an idea of people who live here, like their version of progress, what would be some of those things that kind of go into that equation?
I think one of the first things, if I was the park superintendent and had all the power and all the money that I could, do with what I wanted, Irby Campground would be. It's kind of fallen into more of a day use style, or the facilities have went down a little bit. Capitalizing on the areas that we already have established, making sure there's plenty of trash cans and trash bins, having people that can actually maintain the trash, situation. Having staff within the park is a budget thing, and that is set in Washington. That's not. It's not just a thing of, well, if we become this, we're going to get a whole bunch more money. That's not how it works. But to be able to work on the things that are already, that we can see, the launch areas, there needs to be a little bit better infrastructure and areas for the concessioners to turn around and their paperwork to be done in a more timely manner. Anytime you deal with the government, there's a little lag, and you just they get used to it. But I think that working on what we have, making sure our roads that access to the park, the low water bridges, those things are maintained and taken care of. I think that would go a long way.
Yeah. Some of the things that I always hear about when people come here, especially peak summer, like people want to be on the Buffalo. Mm-hmm. The parking isn't great. Sometimes people are parking on the sides of roads. Mm-hmm. Of course, as you have more and more people on the landscape and in the river, there's an environmental impact there. Trash gets left, like you had mentioned. Some of those things, which in first thought would be, well, funding would help. Maybe build some parking lots or just have some more organization and infrastructure around that. Are those things that you think locals are willing to like entertain, consider, or is it just like, man, there's only so far that we really can go or we're willing to go, and I just don't see how we reconcile some of these differences?
That's tricky for me to answer, because my first thought when you were saying that was, at what point do you stop making parking lots? Mm-hmm. At what point do you say, well, this field is just going to have to be the way that it is, and people are going to have to park along the side of the road, because we can't just pave over all of nature in order to accommodate the people that are coming here, because if we do that, there's not going to be any nature left.
Yeah, you've ruined it.
The very thing they've come to see,
exactly.
You've now changed.